welcome to the Inspired Evolution. And it is such a treat to be here today. Oh my God, I have one of my dearest brothers here with me live on an episode, Miroslav Petrovic. Miroslav, how are you?
Man, just being around you is fucking awesome. I'm great.
Even if it is virtual, bro, it is such a treat to have you here. Look, for those tuning into Miroslav for the first time, there is no bio that can do this man justice. It is just like a depth of presence when you're in his field. He's been inspiring me for a long time, so it's really an honor to have you here today. But I will do the honors, and for those tuning in for the first time, this is a little bit about how it goes. So he believes in the connection, in being in connection with our own personal presence to be one of the most important dynamic relationships we have in life, right? That connection to yourself. This is at its core what he calls the power of presence, right? He's inspired by embodied speaking, embodied being a really key word there, embodied speaking, teaching, and training to face the fears that most often hold us back from our greatest lives. He teaches us that when we conquer the fear and limiting beliefs that hold us back, we can use them as tools to reach our fullest potential. We're going to go so deep on this today. I cannot wait. And so basically, he's a pioneer, a thought leader. Best way to sort of understand what's going on here, he's often described as a cross between Eckhart Tolle and Tony Robbins, right? He's presented across Australia, appeared across mainstream media, worked with over 5,000 people, supporting them to embrace their fears, live a life in alignment with their deepest desires. And he delivers trainings on workplace culture and emotional intelligence, companies like Lululemon and the such. So, man, like, you know, I could do this all day, but it's just such a treat to have you. So I really want to go, you know, we could scratch the surface and do the dilly-dallying that, you know, is always available to us at the beginning of our conversation, or I could do the very Miroslav thing and go from zero to deep in a matter of like 2 seconds. So let's riff with that, man. So what is meta fear? Hit me with it.
Meta fear. The simplest way to describe it is when we relate to fear, I find there's two predominant ways people go about it. One of them is we run from it. And by running, I mean, we typically make excuses like, oh, I don't want to do that. It's not time. I'm not ready yet. The universe has fine. Yeah. Like we build comfortable stories to avoid feeling it. Or there's more of like whether, you know, like a personal training kind of attitude. Like, you know, you just got to smash it and you got to walk through bricks and keep smashing your fears. And meta fear is essentially looking at fear as a gift that can transform who we are. And when we approach fear from this perspective, it stops being something we have to conquer or fight or win over, but it becomes an inspiration and a life source itself. And the only thing that's really changing in one aspect is the way we're relating to and approaching it.
Wow. Tell me more about this. So that sounds so deep. So let's give us a little bit of context to this then. How did this unfold into your life? You know, so obviously for most people that are tuning in, I think we can relate to, you know, like the number one fear being like, okay, cool, that feels like fear and let's not go there, you know, and I can definitely identify times in my past, those that have been tuning into the Inspired Evolution, you know, they know my story a little bit. But then courage has been such a big key, even for me, just stepping out into the Inspired Evolution. And then that kind of flipped into what you have identified as the second space, which is kind of like, oh, like, you know, this is like, if I just take on courage, I can just smash through some fears and really get to some places, you know, and it's a real blessing. But you're highlighting that, you know, fear is actually a gift. And it like is like pointing towards your inspirations, which really resonates for me, by the way. But yeah, tell us more about how this like has precipitated into your life. How did you come across this?
That's a really good question, man. A lot of that story, as much of that story as I could give away within the context of telling the story, is in the TED Talk that just came out. So I'm being mindful to not repeat myself because it's so accessible. But if I was to take it into a chunk, I grew up being super, super, super socially introverted. Like my English teacher in year 12 didn't even know what my voice sounded like until we did the oral, and then he asked around. He's like, "Is that his real voice, or is he putting it on?" Didn't speak. People wouldn't even ask me, "Do you talk?" They would ask like my friend standing next to me, "Does he ever speak?"
Wow, really? No, wait. But you're a speaker, dude. Wait, what? Really?
Yeah, I was really, really fucking close, man. So like, you know, for me watching this TED Talk, it was a sense of I've come a really long way.
Wow. Dude, that is inspirational in and of itself. But yes, please, I've gone on a tangent as I normally do.
Well, it's all right. I came to Australia as like a refugee of 4 years old or so I'm sure there was some trauma there to do with wartime and whatnot. Stutter a lot, which is actually what kept me from speaking. And when I speak in my mother tongue in Serbian, I still stutter quite often. So it's interesting, like whatever's sorting itself out through me is still happening. And coming from that place, my first break of actually feeling somewhat normal came through meditation. And I fell in love with it. I took to meditation like, this is my natural state. I just want to be here. And, my parents were like, Miroslav, don't go to India and live in an ashram. There's reason. They were all concerned about me at times.
For those tuning in, this now makes sense why we're so tight. But yes, we have the same kind of crazy.
That's it, man. And I guess I got to a certain point as well where I was like, this is amazing, but how can I live this experience and be connected to people at the same time?
Yep.
And that's when these opportunities started coming up to speak what was really authentic to me, like things that I would never usually say. And I found as I began speaking from this space, like firstly, there was a lot of fear, and I had to learn to just, I would say, to contain the fear in my body, but I would also flip that over and say it was about letting the fear run through me and just softening into it. And when I started speaking from this place, my mind went so... Are we allowed to swear on this podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Be yourself, brother.
It went so fucking sharp, and I just had this realization. I was like, I spend, 20, 30 minutes, hours trying to cultivate this state in meditation. Like after you get over the initial joys and highs, and you get into normal life, sometimes meditation is a thing you have to do, and you think you're reaching a state. And I found when I connect to Metta, my mind would go sharp and I'd be completely present to what's happening in my body and the relationships around me.
Right.
And I kept doing this because it was quite intoxicating. And sooner or later, people started coming up to me and they were like, Miroslav, have you noticed what happens when you speak? And I was like, what? They're like, you can hear a pin drop in the room, man. And it started opening me up. I'm like, when any one of us is willing to be real and authentic, or embrace our metaphor, embrace our courage, it's like it stops the mind in its tracks. It's inspiring not just for us as individuals, but everyone.
And this is that power of embodied presence that you're talking about. Hey, like I know that, your story is in the TED Talk, but I think just for those that are listening, we're talking about fear and communication and how those two come together. I think, can we share the story where that sort of dropped in for the first time in terms of, I know you and your mother were, in a really good relationship, but at the same time, like communication was a bit of a thing where there was this fear and, brings a bit of context in terms of speaking what is not spoken and like really embodying that fear in that moment.
Yeah, of course. So I will context. It wasn't the first, but it was one of the biggest experiences. Definitely, it was a cultivation of. So when I say I was introverted, like I remember a day when looking at people in the eyes and smiling was a practice of embracing my fear. So by the time I got to this stage, about 6 years ago, my mother was diagnosed with cancer and she was going through that journey, and I was quite often driving her to the hospital and back. And on this one particular visit, we were driving and we started arguing, and my mother was quite earthly and I was quite spiritual, and our arguments were often, she was like, Miroslav, your problem is that you just don't care enough. And I was massively spiritually bypassing at the time as well, and I was like, Mom, your problem is that you care too much. And this back and forth in the car, and she kind of got upset and she folded her arms and she slouched to the other side of the car, and inside I was like, a part of me still wanted to keep arguing. And I was also like, I don't know how much time I've got with her. And I think we don't really know how much time we have with anyone, when I honestly say that. But in this instance, I took a breath and I just asked myself the question, what is it that I'm not expressing? Like what really wants to be expressed that we're running away from with these stories that we're carrying in on? And these words came up and my whole body kind of shriveled in. And I was like, nah, not going to say that. give me something else, I can't go there. And those words were just, it's like I heard them from so deep inside myself. I was like, this has to get honored. And we drove into silence.
Like fear that like it has that visceral physical, like it like like you said, shrivels. Yeah, sorry, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, it's tangible. And as we drove on, like my hands were tight around the steering wheel, man. It was like I was, it was like under attack from myself, that this wasn't an acceptable way to express myself. This thing that wanted to be expressed. And we kept driving and it was dead silent. And as we pulled up, I was like, well, fuck, Miroslav, it's now or never. These words may never be as alive in you as they are now, and you don't want to be putting this shit on. And I looked at her and I was kind of trembling at this point. And I said, Mum, I want to say something to you. And we got out of the car and I walked around and I held her hands and I looked into her eyes, and my heart fucking pounding at this stage. And I was like, I want to tell you that I love you and thank you so much for giving birth to me. And the moment I said, it's like the emotion just flooded through my whole system. And it wasn't overly acknowledged in that moment. I sat down in the car, like overwhelmed with the amount of sensation flowing through me, just knowing it's the right thing to do, but also like mildly having this vulnerability hangover.
Fear and your connection to communication all wrapped into this moment, yeah.
And that really changed the way we related. And one of the most touching things was, man, before she passed, she actually told me how deeply that touched her, and how I recognized only, maybe 6 months ago, actually after I did the TED Talk, or just before on my way to the TED Talk, I had this moment of shit. I didn't know the depth of my own words when I said them to my mother, and I started crying as this realization came to me. I was like, that was maybe the first and only time, at least from me as a child, she felt the depth of appreciation I had for her. She'd always been the loving mother, and I'd always been the child, and that moment was like, bang.
Yeah, incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that, man. And again, sorry for your loss. And yeah, it's such a deep, potent space from which you share that story. And I think it really highlights the just that there are so many spaces inside that we're afraid to like connect to, and exactly how you said, what is not being said in that moment. What is it that is the first thing that I'm running from? And it's like, yeah, that's my fear, and then just like, okay, like, yeah, vulnerability, and can I just hold a little bit of space for this to like just tap into it and just say, and for some people it may not be like speaking, it may be something else, maybe like, oh, I'm afraid to take action in this space. Or for me in my past, it was I was like, my biggest fear was what happens if the consistent paycheck isn't coming in. It was like, legitimately, what happens then? Like I just fall off the edge of the earth, legitimately, is what I thought. And hence the inspired evolution. But yeah, I totally resonate with what you're saying, and the depths of your story. Like, yeah, that's on a whole nother level. But yeah, it's amazing, brother. You touched on basically the third way of being, which is, dancing with your fear, then is probably one way of describing it. And maybe I'm leaning into knowing a little bit about your story and how much embodiment work you've done just to like embody and then bring embodiment into meditation. How does that work into, guiding people through their processes? Like, any advice for people that want to move towards a relationship with fear the way you described?
Yeah, I'm going to context what you said just before as well. I feel it's really important. It's not about what it looks like, it's about what it feels like. Some people get this idea that facing fears looks like jumping out of airplanes. That's a fear, but it's like, how relevant is that to the rest of your life, For me, small things, it's like, it's like when you go for a dance and you can feel sometimes your body's rigid and you're dancing just to be like someone else. And it's like, how does my body want to express itself? And then you feel that sense of, oh, that's a bit vulnerable. For me, vulnerability is a sign that we're embracing metta fear. And when I say vulnerability, it's like some of these words get taken as, it's not about breaking down. It's not about telling people the inside workings of your life. It's just about embracing the habitual patterns we have and then finding a way through them. It's funny, I usually explain this with my body. It's like, we always walk and it's like, okay, well, what happens is you just bring a little bit of movement somewhere where there is none. And that, for me, functions on all parts of our identity. It's like, if you consider yourself not being a singer, begin to play with that. If you don't express yourself from a deeper place, begin to play with that. If you're always serious and you're always expressing yourself from a deep place, try being silly and jovial. It's like...
Next podcast, Amrit is going to be so serious. I like how you're laughing, because it's like, yeah, good luck.
I've seen the picture. I'm like, no, that doesn't
work. I'm gonna surprise you.
I look forward to it. I look forward to how your guest is going to respond to it as well. We'll cut into you, man.
Yeah.
And you know that you said a few key words. It's really about noticing the resistance and then learning how to soften into it. And for me, meditation is one of the best tools here. And when I say meditation, people are like sitting there on a cushion and whatever. I'm like, for me, meditation is not that thing that you do with your eyes closed. That's what it looks like from the outside. From the inside, it teaches you how to cultivate stillness so things can move through you. Creativity, expression, power, influence. You learn how to take a back seat so then you can, for those of you that can't see, my fist is hitting my hands to really be powerful in the world. And that for me is embodied presence. When we can let our mind and our emotions become still, we can move them through the body. I've lost my train of thought.
Yeah, well, let me pick something up, which is basically, there's this conversation to be had, though, because there is the fact that, fear is biological, right? So there is a certain element of fear that definitely serves us, because it's like it puts us in that fight or flight state. Now, there's a whole nother rabbit hole to go on in terms of like, we caffeinate ourselves and we're like jacking up our hormones and going like, yeah, and inducing like fight and flight states, but that's like a whole nother rabbit hole. But there's one thing that, like I've been looking more and more, the people that, just doing the work that I've been doing, there's so many limiting beliefs, and those are, as you have identified, like centered around fear, and just getting more and more curious about it. We're actually as our ancestors were, they profited, not profited, but like genetically were preferred. How do I term that? But I think everyone's getting that. Like in terms of like our forefathers were encouraged to be fearful, because the ones that were more fearful, not like, okay, let's just look at it this way. There's a lion there, right? If I'm the optimist, I'm like, hey, kitty, 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 kitty. As opposed to like, if I'm the guy that's like, whoa, 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 that cat's pretty big. It's a bit too big, so that caution and that sense of like discernment and that little bit of fear, right, is actually like survival of the fittest, right? So that's come pre-programmed in, right?
And that for me is a different distinction. That's like super, super important. That yes, we do have a biological fear response, and that serves a purpose. If someone's running after you, run. Like you're not going to sit there and breathe and notice what's going on. It's like, forget about it, man. That's a whole different relationship to fear. For me, meta fear is perhaps more articulately refined as when it begins to poke holes in our identity, like the fear. It's kind of like whatever you want to call it, your intuition, your inner wisdom, your guidance, your unconscious mind. It's kind of like, and even the feeling like when your heart starts pounding, it's like there's something pounding inside of you that wants to come out, and you can run from that. But sooner or later, you're going to realize your life is fucking amazing when you begin letting it out. And in ways that you can't even understand. There's a great line in one of the yogic texts that goes, to the unenlightened, God himself appears as fear. When I heard this, I was like,
why there's pin drops when you're talking.
And I only came across this line like within the last 6 months or so.
Yeah.
In preparing for a meditation retreat, and I was like, "Fuck this line!" I've come to discover this in my own experience. When I embrace my fear, it's like I go into, sometimes there's a lot of concepts around this. But you could call it the divine realm. You could call it God. Essentially, to me, the experience, like when you step into fear, and let's say you're meeting God. Well, like, what the fuck does that mean? It means in my experience, it means you're meeting the full potential of what you're capable of. And you don't even know what that is. You only have the habitual references you've been living in. When you step into that realm, it's like you are so completely open to inspiration. You yourself don't know what's coming next, which is like, it's like inspiration overload. And this is like where wisdom teachings has become fascinating to me. In Hebrew, there's two words for fear, which I go into in the TED Talk as well. One of them is pahad, which is generally how we speak about fear. The other one is yirah. And yirah is a word that is more closely translated to awe. Rabbi Alan Liu, I believe it is, he explains it as your body being filled with far more energy or sensation than you're accustomed to. So when that flood of energy, flood of God, or whatever you want to call it, comes streaming through people, they panic. They don't know what to do with it. And that's where having that backbone of meditation, it's like, it's the master key. It's like, I can let this move through me and I can keep moving and acting and inspiring people while I'm still alive.
Wow, I love that. The awe, like learning to capacitate the awe, because there is like genuine awe. Like when you've got that genuine awe, it's just like there is that element of fear to it, right? Wow, there's a word for that. Was that pahad or was that? Can you?
Ira is
Ira. Ira.
And I say awe, like, it's bigger than awe.
Wow. Wow. And pahad is like general fear when you like.
Pahad is more like, our imagined fear of something unfortunate happening in the future.
So this is actually really, really a great little segue, because for a while now, I've been holding the phrase, which has really been helping me with fear, that, we suffer more in our imagination than in reality. And this is a Stoic quote from Seneca, right? We suffer more in our imagination than in reality. And the more I repeat this mantra, I'm like, okay, everything is like, I'm contextually living everything out in my head. And in reality, it's very unlikely that, this is possible. And this has shown up recently in my life in terms of asking for people for help. It's like I have this fear that people are going to judge me as being like, oh, he needs help. He's not a man, and it's like, actually, we're in a tribe and a community. We actually need each other to ask for help. But I think like that is I can see the juxtaposition in what you shared before in terms of, like fear is the invitation for where you meet God. I'm paraphrasing what you said. But
nice, man. I love it.
That is such a different perspective. It's like, hey, this is like where the light, where you meet the light.
Mm. Yeah, and I do want to give a disclaimer of this. Like, I tell people this. I'm like, this is spirituality on steroids. This is personal transformation on steroids, whatever you want to call it. So be careful how you use it, and use it sparingly, or use it to the full availability you can. But it's like when you start expressing yourself, your relationships will change, and they can change really, really quickly. Mm-hmm. And there's a sense of like, be centered within what you're doing. It's easy to delude ourselves, and it's easy to say I'm doing X, Y, Z, but it might not be completely matched.
And I think go on.
Just give me a moment. Yeah, the best way I can describe it is, it's like everything we're saying without the meditation is almost not it. We need to have the capacity to separate ourselves from those imagined fears and from the things we're imagining might happen and how people might think of us, to actually lean back into the body and go, okay, is this metta fear? Yes. No. Boom. Go on. Yeah, that's on.
Yeah, I was just going to endorse what you were saying, because I know that you've been on this path and on this journey for such a long time. Like I know you've been working through just, like your edges, as you've highlighted, like you've had your speech stuff, but then also like, just seeing your journey, like through embodiment, through meditation, through holding conscious circles, through holding like events for people to come together and like explore like consciousness and spirituality amongst themselves. And I think those tuning into you for the first time might be like, okay, wow, like fear. But I just really like in this moment, the gravity of just how much work you've put into coming to this point and really sharing this, I just want to take a moment to really acknowledge the depths of what's being talked about here and just the work you've really done on yourself and with your community and with us to really be able to share this. And yeah, I'm just really honored that you're here. I want to lean into that a little bit more, if I may. You touched on the word spiritual bypassing before, and this is something that, is something that I'm really conscious of, just in my own space. Like, if I can give it a little bit of context, and I'll just, I consistently sit with this, in that with the Inspired Evolution, you'll find a Facebook page, which is, just flooded with positivity, just consistently flooded with positivity. So something positive happens in the world and it's like, bang, the Inspired Evolution will be there to share it. I'm absolutely thrilled by that. And obviously the tribe that that connects with that, there's so many people loving and just talking to each other in around these positive changes. I just feel honored to be like part of like that space, to be honest. And it's just a blessing. And at times I've sort of, gotten like many messages going, hey, like, what about this that's happening that's, that's challenging? And I've had some really deep looks inside and go, hey, like, it's not that I'm discounting that this is happening. With the best of my ability, I'm just trying to bring balance to the media that there is in the world. There's a lot of fear mongering in the media, and I just know that there are positive things happening, and there's like, where your attention goes, energy flows. But even in that, like where attention goes, energy flows, it's like there is like the slight nuance that maybe you prefer to be positive, and just like, hey. But then in that, there's a rub because, hey, like maybe there is some sort of shadow work. Maybe there is some sort of work that, you're not looking to look at, not looking to reveal, that requires, your attention. Can you tell us a little bit more? Like, that's like, in my opinion, what I understand to be like spiritual bypassing. But to the best of my ability, I try to acknowledge what's going on, but at the same time, put the best foot forward as well. So, in that sort of dance between the two, can you tell us more about your journey in spiritual bypassing?
Beautiful hearing as well. I guess how we all go through this in our own way, and especially, what you're sharing here, your own journey with it. For me, like if I was to articulate it in simple terms, I would say it would be the disconnection of what we think between what is. And what I mean by that is, like, for me, at one point in my life, I was very into like Advaita Vedanta teachings. You're not the body, you're not the mind, you are nothing, which is fantastic. And I pretended to be nothing because that's what the tradition kind of, that's what I got from the tradition. And I got to say, man, if I'm being cutthroat, it's not just me. I see it with a lot of people that walk the walk, but it's like a disconnect between this is what I think about myself in the world and the lived experience. And the lived experience, like, it's not congruent. It's not communicating the same information for me. Now, maybe the teachers that are offering this, it's congruent in their bodies. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the people that preach it, it's like, I can't buy that philosophy. And I spent a lot of my younger years, because I was so disconnected socially and from the world, I spent a lot of my younger years diving into spirituality because it gave me freedom. And like I said before, I got to this certain point where it's like, I got to bring the ship back down. Like, I got through my body and into the world, because otherwise it's useless. Yeah. And for me personally, it got to a point where if I stayed in my spirituality, it wasn't actually doing the work. Like, doing the work was showing up to people and telling them I loved them and how I appreciated them. Doing the work was teaching and speaking and turning myself inside out. Doing the work was like feeling an impulse that I had to go spend a night in the forest by myself and just lay down on the path. It's like, this stuff isn't logical. And, I'm going to share a little story. I had an experience the other day. This is going away from spiritual bypassing, but it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So, like, you take me back 10 years ago, like, living in an ashram or a cave was a serious contemplation for me. I was like, I'm down for this shit. Spirituality, woo, And I went to Chadstone, which is a popular they call it the fashion capital, which gives you an idea. I ran in the last half an hour just to get something. Running out, there's a pizza place that I like, and as I was walking past, I was like, I'm going to grab a pizza. And it's a last minute rush, everyone's buying stuff. So I got there, like, this queue of people formed behind me, and while I'm waiting for the clerk to kind of give me the pizza, I noticed the other woman that's working there, and man, she had the most beautiful arm. I noticed myself thinking that, and I'm like, that's a really strange thought. Maybe she works out. And then I noticed this sense inside me. I was like, I'm really attracted to her. And it was a funny thing because she wasn't like the most stunning woman at Chadstone. The Chadstone's like a catwalk. People get dressed up so they can walk through Chadstone in their newest fashion. And as the woman that was serving me was giving me, and inside I'm like, what's going on? It's like my heart starts pounding. I'm like, I have to express this to her. And I'm also like, I'm at Chadstone. I came here to buy a top. I do not want to be going through some personal transformation and meta-fear experience. And I was also like, and no one's going to know if I do this or not at the end of the day. It's like, it's an experience of my inner self. But I was like, I'll know if I didn't do it. And I leaned into it and I was like, okay, this is going to be weird, but let's go with it. And I'm like, this older woman standing beside us. There's a bunch of people standing around us. And this other girl standing on the other side of the counter. And I was like, thank you. And by the way, you're really, really beautiful. And when I said it, it was like a wave of silence just went through the space. She was really touched and she was like, oh, thank you so much and whatever. It felt like the mind energy or the mind chatter just disappeared in the room like that. And that for me is the power of meta-fear. And I stepped away from that. My whole body just flooded with bliss. Now you could call that fear, you could call it bliss, you can call it whatever you want, but it was like an enlightening experience. And I'm there standing in Chadstone. I took 20, 30 steps. I just stood by the escalator eating my pizza in absolute bliss and reflecting on, if you told me 10 years ago this is what my spiritual journey would look like,
if this is what it looked like to put on the spiritual rubber gloves. By the way, this story comes with a disclaimer. If you're married, careful. This is not a prescription. This is a metaphor. But yeah, no, I think I deeply resonate with what you're saying as well, because at a certain point it's this is like, I thought just to realize that I thought I was going to interview 100, 200 people such as yourself and take away the best of what you guys had done in terms of living life on your own terms, and realize that there was a blueprint to living the life of a creative or an entrepreneur, like an actual this is how an engineer thinks, right? And it's like, I'm going to see how everybody built their thing and then deconstruct that and then try and reconstitute that and then put all the right pieces in the place and go forward into that. Yeah. And that was that was legitimately like how I thought, okay, maybe the Inspired Evolution will look like this. And then I got 10 episodes in and I was like, oh, wow. There's no formula for creativity. There's no formula for being an entrepreneur. It's literally your own creative expression. And, creativity being that, fundamental force that, brings creation. We call it creation, right? And just stepping into that and going, right, okay, this means I've just got to leave what is not serving me and step into the unknown and that resistance and that fear. And like I said, my fear was the white picket fence and, the consistent paycheck that was leading me to. And it's really deep. And I think you touched on something that is really profound, but really subtle in that story, which was, you didn't have to take action in that moment. You really didn't, I didn't have to leave my corporate gig. You didn't have to reach out to this person and say what was so you can feel it. It's palpable. Like, you've been swearing a bit. It's fucking palpable. And you can actually feel that. It's like, but it's like the thing that has just got the most resistance around it. And then moving into that, but having the space to do that for yourself, I think there's a really deep point that you touched on, is that self-accountability.
Yeah, it's like, that age-old story with Michelangelo when he was painting the Sistine Chapel, and he was taking he was painting and he was taking this immaculate care in the corners, and one of the caretakers came by and they were like, why are you doing that? No one's going to see that anyway. And he looked at him and he said, God will see. And again, people can take that religiously. I take that. I'm like, that greater part of me, the full potential of who I am, knows that I didn't do a proper fucking job.
Yeah, I'm really inspired by that. That means so much to me at the moment. It's really resonating really deeply. There's I've been researching a lot of people, as just interviewing entrepreneurs pretty much every week, basically. And some of the conversations I've had have been like, there's been opportunities for people to basically, their business was basically flailing. They could have, sold off their partner through their shares, like they could have basically, their business got to a point where it was like, okay, the business is not doing too well. I can claim bankruptcy and sort of take my money and then start again with the money that I get, and go in a funky direction, let's say. But they genuinely end up like doing the right thing. And the question being like, there was such an opportunity for you to make a windfall, right? But you chose not to do that. Explain why. It goes, because at the end of it, that's not the person that I am, that I show up to be, Yes, I'll make a windfall, but at the same time, it's like, that's not how I do business. And I think this ties in with, what you're saying in terms of like really integrating, your spirituality into here and now. Is like, how you're showing up is how you show up for one thing is how you show up for everything, right? And yeah, and like, you were probably one of the first people that highlighted this point for me that, spirituality and business are not like, they're not two like mutually exclusive circles, and I think that was probably one of the first things that I remember, like when I first met you, I was like, I want to know more about you. I think you remember, I was like, I want to know more about you, I want to spend more time with you, I want to understand what's going on here, because legitimately, like, you had created your life around what mattered to you spiritually, and it was like, oh wow, you're like actually in business doing what you love and showing up. And that is, you could see that like you were holding your edges and you were doing your business spiritually. It was, I'm still, in awe of that moment. I can feel the energy. I can go straight back there if I have to. Yeah.
I remember it as well. It's like I'm getting goosebumps. And and I want to reflect back, and you are fucking doing it, which is powerful. That's for me when we stoke other people's fire comes alight, and that's what inspiration is in a sense. And I feel you're touching on something really interesting here, and I want to highlight when we operate from this place of pure presence, of metaphor, of following our inspiration. Sometimes inspiration people can take it literally, like I'm inspired to get a Ferrari, so like that's obviously it's not what we're talking about here.
It's more a lure. Yeah.
We can have ideas of what it's going to look like. So that story with me and that girl, or with me and my mum, or I've got another good one I might share later. But I could have had this idea of, well, firstly, I've got a partner. I wasn't looking for another one, so I didn't want anything further. But there was my mind going, what does this mean? What if I get rejected? What if she laughs at me? Blah, 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 blah. What do I really want? Where's this coming from? And I was like, all of this is stories that my mind knows. And key tip in kind of dealing with it, it's like meditation helps us separate from that. It's like that our mind is just habitual patterns that already live in the nervous system. And if I can separate that, that's just the first step. If I can separate from that, I can allow myself to cultivate the feeling and then come from the feeling, which is so transcendental in a sense. But I feel in embracing it, it's like there's a beautiful line in the Bhagavad Gita, and it's a few lines I'm just going to bring together. For those of you that haven't read the Bhagavad Gita, like this was one of my first bliss experiences. I was working as a graphic designer in front of a computer in a very, very boring office job. And I started listening to the Bhagavad Gita because my meditation teacher said I might like it. And I was sitting there with my headphones in, listening to it. And the story goes that it's based in a civil war, and Krishna, who's a prince, is about to ride into a civil war against the foes. And his charioteer here in this story is the embodiment of God. Take that to mean what you want, but let's say the all-encompassing wisdom that's available to us, and power and everything else. So the other guy asked for Krishna's army. Arjuna, the prince, asked for Krishna's wisdom. And he asks Krishna, before we go into battle, can you ride through no man's land so I can have a look at my enemies? And as they go to ride, Arjuna says to him, stop, I can't do this. I can't do this. Those are my cousins. That's my archery teacher with absolute acclaim. In old Indian culture, a teacher was one of the highest things you have. He's like, I can't fight these people. And he dropped down onto his knees and he just began to weep. And Krishna turned back to him and said, get up. You have to. This is your duty. And I'm paraphrasing like 16 chapters here.
No. Yeah. You're doing a great job, by the way. I know the story well.
And like the rest of the 16 chapters go into why, but the basic essence of it is you're born a warrior, and it's your duty to fight. And realize that if you're fighting from this place, it's very different than if you're fighting from a range of other different places. And I mean, this is an extreme example, like when it comes to something like that. For me, like that was the embodiment of Metta fear. It's like, wow, this is what I'm here for. I'm here to speak this. And Krishna goes on to say, act for action's sake and be unattached to the fruits of your actions. In plain English, it's your duty to fucking act, man. What happens after that is not in your control. You don't even own the properties. People might love you, they might hate you, but you just have to fucking take the action.
I think what you've touched on there is really profound as well, because I'm just wanting to have this conversation with you now. We happen to be recording it. But from what I have learned about this story, all these characters, they embody a certain set of values and a certain set of characteristic traits, right? One of my favorite dissertations on the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata talks about, it's actually titled The Difficulty of Being Good. If you want to read it, it's an amazing dissertation.
I'm clicking for you right now.
Yeah, because basically what's happening is you've got all these characters on both sides of the war, right? And one is greed, and one is kindness, one is compassion, one is unity, right? And you can see that these are their values. If you start looking at that, obviously they have got characters and they're married to each other, and some of them are married to 3 other people. And when you start looking at it, it's like, oh, compassion is married to kindness and gratitude. You know, it's like, it's really interesting to see how that is mapped out in like personified. Yeah, it's fascinating, right? And then watching like, and you know, and you touched on it then, it's like just act for action's sake, because again, it's like, you know, going back into that, you know, more spiritual, more theoretical, more philosophical space, but, you know, we are the universe looking in on ourselves, and it is just an energy that's present. You know, you may be the energy of, you know, gratitude, and you may be interfacing with something that is, you know, at edges with you, or it may be that gratitude and compassion coexist for the most part, but they still have challenges. In some moments, it is easy to be grateful, but difficult to be compassionate, you know, and they have a rub against each other, you know, and that story is so deep and so profound how they...
That is like, it's happening inside our own worlds as well. Like that war is really fucking inside me and fucking inside you.
At all times. And it is so profound and is so poetic that these energies just exist, you know, and it's like, what do we honor and how do they do? Or like you said, just cultivate that space of meditation and know that, you know, this is like an epic saga. Like it's a story, 16 chapters and like, you know, written so long ago, just discussing this discourse of like these energies that are present and how we show up for them, you know, is, yeah, you know, and I love, again, just, you know, that space that, you know, what you've held for Metta fear, you know, just highlighting that, you know, these things may feel uncomfortable, but kind of what you're alluring to here is just, in my humble opinion, and I might be wrong, call me out, is just have that presence. You know, just have that presence to like what needs to process and just be who you are meant to be, you know, and maybe where you're resisting and where that fear is where you're actually meant to lean into to be that greatest version of yourself.
Yeah, fucking open. And you know, presence is power, man. Like it really is. Free to be present is how powerful we are in any given situation. It's like I could take this conversation with you in so many ways, but I think sometimes people, and I did too, we take meditation. Everyone watching Amrit just dancing all over the place. We take meditation to be a fucking passive thing. And sure, we can live our lives having meditation be a passive thing, but for me, meditation is there to fucking bring through the fire. It's like, and to go to the depths of stillness and discover that, you know, I can be nothing. I can be in the void, and all of this can still exist around me. But if I'm going to be embodied, it's like, how can I be embodied to the depths of myself? So, you know, when this fucking comes through, it's like, I'm ready for it.
I love that. In this moment, I'm just so in awe of the fact that we've got 2 meditation teachers here, both swearing their way through a conversation, and there's none of this closing down your eyes, on your binaural beats, and just getting yourself into a relaxed posture.
That's it. Like, it's supposed to come back there, but for me, like, you know, we need the fucking range.
And And so for those that like really, but tuning into, now Miroslav totally standing in, what it means to be, like embracing your fear and what meta fear is, and you're coining terms and terminology and owning this space right now and sharing so much like around the world. You're delivering TED Talks on this kind of stuff. The pre-sequel to a lot of this was, if you had questions around authenticity, you would come to speak to Miroslav. That was kind of the conversation point. It was like, authenticity? That's a great question. Like when you get meditative, you can just observe. So who am I showing up as? Why am I showing up as that? All these amazing questions. People would consistently channel people to Miroslav for the authenticity kind of question. Is it safe to say that on that journey of authenticity, perhaps fear, finding your most authentic self, is leaning into the fear? Is that easy? Is that okay to sort of jump to that conclusion just by watching your journey from the outside in, or have I overstepped?
No, I think you're on the mark. And I've done a lot of different work, like on myself. I mean, whatever a lot of work means. You can spend 50 years in therapy. You can go to the Amazon. You can meditate in an ashram. I haven't spent 50 years in therapy, but I have. He
has done snippets of all the above, though.
And some of them more intensely than others. And people often ask me, "What's the most powerful thing you've done?" It's like, how can I be more like you? Not in that sense. Like, how do I cultivate this in myself? And I always say, for me, the most powerful thing ever has been public speaking. And to get to the stage where I can step on a stage and just speak and have the experience of watching myself speak. So I don't rehearse and memorize and prepare in that way. I do get insights where the conversation's going to go.
Yeah.
I give myself over to that moment. And when you have living people with you that are open to seeing you, that is the most transformational thing you can experience, especially if you step into a space of metta fear and you're exposing a part of yourself that's never been seen. That's instantly transformational. And in a sense, you begin to integrate the experience because you're being seen. You're not doing this stuff in front of a mirror. What I love to do often when I have the opportunity when I'm speaking is get other people on the stage. It's like, have an experience of this. What's in your heart now that's never been expressed? And you see people like, first you see them kind of getting choked up because it's a bit like, if you thought every human had an X amount of presence, or like, it's like a battery charge, when you put 100 of them in a room, man, that's a lot of stimulus. That's a lot of presence hitting one person. And it's like surfing. You either learn to soften into that and to feel the ocean underneath you, or you just buckle. Or you memorize things and disconnect and numb yourself from the experience and just deliver boring presentations, which saddens me is a lot of the way public speaking and presentation and teaching is taught, which is what the shift I really want to make, like bringing it into an embodied presence where just being there will inspire each other.
But
I see people get up and it's like, they come up stiff and it's like, okay, just let yourself be seen, let people see you, and notice the energy in the room and the connection begins to flow. And it's like, okay, so what's really in your heart? What wants to be expressed? And when fucking people speak from that space, man, it's like the whole room just tingles up. And it's like bonds and connections, they're made like instantly just because people are willing to be so raw and vulnerable and authentic. And sometimes people like, how do you go about doing this? I'm like, it's with all the small moments. It's doing it with your friends, with family, with, the clerk that's giving you ice cream or pizza or whatever.
The lady whose arm you see that's serving you pizza.
The arms are a sign.
Oh, brother, absolutely. I love you more. So, look, the thing that is resonating super, super deeply for me is I've got this quote written on my mirror, and it's something I just really feel like I really want to in this conversation, I just want to dedicate this to you because it means so much to me. I've had it written on my mirror for 3 years now, and it basically goes that our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. The deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure, brother. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. It's not just in some of us, it's in all of us. And as we let our own lights shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. as we are liberated from our fear, our presence automatically liberates others. I just want to take a moment, brother, because many years ago, I remember being in your presence, and there's this quote that, you know, when you are a flame, you know, just continue to shine, because there is no stealing from the flame. There is just sharing the light, you know. And you've been such an integral person that's shared so much light into my life that I really just want to take a moment to honor and acknowledge just how much that means to me, and how much you embody that, and how much you've, you know, contributed to my life. And yeah, just honoring you for who you are, brother. Thank you. Love you.
Thank you, bro. That's so beautiful.
So for those tuning in to the podcast that want to tune into Miroslav, just before we start bursting into tears here, what is the best way to get in touch with you, brother?
Through my website. So it's miroslavp.com, miroslavp.com.
Awesome. And there is a TED Talk on YouTube as well. Check it out. It's basically called Metta Fear. That's what I searched to find it. Yeah, great talk. Really, really powerful. And we touched on bits and pieces of it here, but it'll definitely be, we'll hyperlink it into the show notes for those that want to tune in. Really profound place to sort of tune in and have a bit more of a conversation, just listening into what Metta Fear is about. And brother, just before we tune out, obviously I have to do my gratitude pieces at the very end, but I just want to ask you one last question. I
want to put something into it as well, but you go first.
Sure. My final question, and by no means my least question, you know, beyond the work that you do, you know, beyond all the edges, beyond the name, beyond the skin suit, beyond the incredible fashion sense, who is Miroslav?
Oh, God. Love. Maybe a little bit of joy. Definitely more joy when I'm around you.
That's such good.
We get along really well.
Such a treat. Tell me you were going to say something.
You went deep just like that.
That's your fault. That's your fault. I'm taking no responsibility for that.
Well, I'll take another step into the depth. This whole time most of the time we've been talking, there's been a sensation in my heart, and it feels like a dagger or something is just sitting in there. I'm like, and I want to presence this. Maybe because I love you so much. I'm not even sure what the words is, but I'm like, I just need to take a breath into this while we're together in this moment. So that's all right. I'm so fucking inspired by what you're doing and the edges you're pushing, and probably the hearts and the minds you're setting alight, which you don't even know what's happening. It's like you're just fucking throwing these embers out there and they're catching light, and the way you're touching the world is deep, man. And the way you share yourself from your heart, and how much joy you bring into any space is so fucking beautiful. And you know, I really, really, really love you, Amrit. I feel like we haven't spent that much time together in person, but yeah, I see you and I'm like, this guy's fucking awesome. Keep doing what you're doing.
Touch wood, brother. Oh man.
And you know, one day I hope I can cultivate the level of joy and expression that you so naturally have.
Sure. You're already doing. You inspire me. What are you talking about? Miroslav being a cheeky monkey on the podcast. Oh, brother. Thank you so much. That means so much. Truly does. I've obviously got to, on that thank you, I've got to thank you for being here today. Thank you so much. Sharing your energy, your wisdom. I know, you do a lot of work, not just, on yourself, but for others as well. You're flying out tomorrow, and yet you're carving out time to, engage and be present and show up and share something that is so potent and so important to be shared. So thank you for carving the time out for us all here today, being present.
Thank you for having me, bro.
And just in that, thank you for all the work you've done on yourself. I personally know your story. I know your brother really well as well. And, just like the journey, that you guys have been on and you've been on, like there's a lot of depth in that story. And you show up so graceful in and around that. And it's such a blessing. I just want to honor all the work you've done on yourself. And as always, wishing you all the best for the future. And whatever's not there, let's wrangle some more in.
I just love this idea. I'm like, I want to work with you in some way. I'm like, I don't know how this is going to come together, but we'd have so much fucking room. So much in the room together. Like, we're going to make something up and down the track.
Let's build a temple first. Let's create a container. Oh, brother, thank you so much. For those tuning in, miroslavp.com. Check out the TED Talk. Such a treat to have you here. Love you. Thank you. Thank you all for tuning in. Much, much love.
Love you, bro.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the Love of the Inspired Evolution and sharing the Love of the Inspired Evolution. If you feel like this content has supported you or may support anyone else that you know may resonate with the content of it, please share away and share the love around. Thank you guys so much. And to stay up to date on whatever's coming out with the Inspired Evolution, please subscribe. There's all these links in the bio for you to tune into the episodes and all these different platforms, just so the message can get to you and your loved ones. Thank you so much for all your love and support. Stay inspired to evolve.